Miles adjusted his tie for the fourth time in as many minutes, each tug doing little to loosen the knot in his chest. The glass doors of the law firm's lobby reflected his fidgeting back at him, a tall, narrow man in an ill-fitting suit, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. He'd once thought this place would make him feel powerful, but tonight its marble floors and gold trim only reminded him how much of his life wasn't really his own. Inside, the conference room lights glowed behind smoked glass. He could see them waiting, the partners, the ones with names on the door, and beside them, Rhea. She sat at the far end of the table, perfectly still except for one finger tapping the arm of her chair. She looked up when she saw him lingering in the hallway, her dark eyes pinning him in place. No warmth, no smile, just that steady look that told him he'd better not screw this up. Rhea had always been the firm's secret weapon. When she first walked in 10 years ago, fresh out of law school, hair tucked into a neat bun, voice smooth enough to sell poison to the desperate, they'd underestimated her. Now, they feared her. Miles did too, but there was a part of him that envied her certainty. She never flinched. She never apologized. He pushed through the door and felt the stale air hit him. Too many egos, not enough oxygen. The room went silent. One of the partners, a soft-jowled man named Harrow, gestured at the empty chair beside Rhea. Miles took it, his knees brushing hers under the table. She didn't move. "Mr. Donovan," Harrow began, folding his hands like a patient priest, "do you understand the terms of what you're about to do?" Miles nodded. He'd read the contract a dozen times. He'd even highlighted the parts that scared him most. Selling the evidence meant selling out everything he believed he was: the honest attorney, the good son, the man who kept his promises. But the money was too much to ignore, enough to pay off his father's debts, enough to buy silence for the mess he'd made. "He understands," Rhea said before Miles could open his mouth. Her voice slid across the table, cold as steel. "He understands this is the only way to keep what he cares about intact." Harrow leaned back, satisfied. Another partner, a woman with hair so blonde it looked silver under the fluorescent lights, slid a thin folder toward Miles.
"Sign," she said.
He didn't reach for the pen yet. He glanced at Rhea, searching for a flicker of reassurance, but her face was carved from stone. Once, not long ago, they'd been more than colleagues. She'd whispered secrets to him in the dark, confessions about what it cost to win at any cost. She'd promised they'd protect each other. Now he wondered if she'd meant it. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled. He could feel his father's voice in the back of his head. "If you do the right thing, you'll always have yourself." But that voice was drowned out by the louder one. The creditors' threats, the hospital bills stacking up like tombstones, the sleepless nights when he'd counted and recounted zeros until they blurred together. Miles signed. The scratch of ink on paper sounded louder than the rain tapping the windows. When he set the pen down, his palms were slick with sweat. He'd crossed a line. There'd be no crawling back. Harrow clapped him on the shoulder, an oily parody of affection. "You did the right thing, son." Rhea stood. Her chair scraped the floor like a blade. She leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. "Meet me after. Upstairs. I'll explain what comes next." He wanted to ask her if she was proud of him or if she pitied him. But before he could find the words, she was already at the door, her heels clicking down the hallway like a countdown he couldn't stop. Alone in the conference room, Miles stared at his signature. It looked childish, almost forgivable, like something that could be erased. But the pages were already being collected, slid into a leather briefcase that would disappear before dawn. Evidence traded for loyalty, loyalty traded for silence. He wondered if, tomorrow, he'd even recognize the man who had agreed to this. Upstairs, the building's private offices sat dark and quiet. He found Rhea in the corner suite, looking out over the city. Her reflection in the window was a ghost beside the skyline's glittering teeth. "You think you're ruined now," she said without turning. "You're not. You're useful. That's the only thing that keeps you safe." He stepped closer, wishing she'd look at him the way she used to, like she saw someone worth saving. "How long do we keep paying?" Her smile was thin, bitter. until they stop asking. He wanted to touch her, to reach out and find the part of her that had once let him believe they were on the same side. But she stepped away, putting the desk between them. There's another meeting tomorrow.
Same time, she said.
You'll be there. Miles looked past her shoulder, to the city spread out like an open wound. He wondered if he'd ever stop feeling this raw. Or if the wound was the price of survival, something you learn to live with like a phantom limb. Tomorrow, then, he said, the words tasting like ash. As he left, he didn't look back. He knew if he did, he'd see her watching him, already deciding how much of him she could carve away next. And somewhere in that darkness, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to carve something back for himself. Rain clung to the city like a fever that wouldn't break. Miles stood under the crumbling awning of a convenience store, eyes flicking from the street to his phone. The message from Rhea had been clear. Asterisk, wait for the driver. Don't ask questions. Asterisk, but every minute he spent alone with his thoughts felt like they might devour him whole. A battered sedan rolled up to the curb, tires hissing through puddles. The passenger window slid down an inch. The man inside wore a baseball cap pulled low, eyes hidden behind tinted lenses even in this bruised dusk light. He didn't speak, just jerked his chin toward the door. Miles hesitated, the air thick with the smell of wet concrete and fried food drifting from the store behind him. He'd never been this far from his old life, yet never so tangled in it either. He climbed in, shutting the door against the storm. The lock clicked shut, too final. They drove in silence. Miles traced raindrops racing each other down the glass, mind turning over what Rhea hadn't said. He knew better than to ask the driver anything. The man's jaw worked like he was chewing on secrets he'd never spit out. After 15 minutes, they turned off the main road, bumping down an alley lined with rusting fire escapes and dumpsters overflowing with the city's rot. The car stopped beside an unmarked door. The driver killed the engine, exhaled, and finally spoke. Inside. Second floor. She's waiting. Miles stepped out into the downpour. Water soaked his collar before he reached the door. It opened on squealing hinges, the smell of mildew and stale cigarettes greeting him like an old debt collector. The stairwell was narrow, lit by a single flickering bulb. He climbed, each step creaking under his weight. Rhea was there as promised. She leaned against the frame of a window with broken blinds, the neon glow of a liquor store sign outside painting stripes of pink across her face. Her coat was draped over a chair, sleeves still damp from the rain. She didn't look up when he entered. Instead, she lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating the hard lines of her jaw. You look like hell, she said, not unkindly. He shrugged off his wet jacket and draped it over the back of another chair. You don't exactly pick 5-star meeting spots. That's the point. She flicked ash into a coffee mug on the windowsill. No one sees us here. No one asks why you're asking the questions you shouldn't. Miles glanced around the room. Battered filing cabinet, a scarred table, 2 chairs that didn't match. The only sign of life was a battered duffel bag on the floor, half-sipped. Something metal gleamed inside. What is this place? He asked. A dead man's office, she replied. He won't be needing it anymore. He didn't ask who the man was. He'd learned not to press for details that would make him flinch later. Rhea finally looked at him, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion in her face. Felix Ortega. Ever heard the name? Miles shook his head. Should I have? He's new blood, pushing in where he shouldn't. Trying to shake down the people we need. If he succeeds, everything we've done unravels. We. The word caught in his throat. Is that what this is, Rhea? We? She ignored the question, crushing her cigarette into the mug. Felix runs numbers out of an old club on Harland. Upstairs, in the back. You're going there tonight. Miles recoiled. Me? I thought I was finished after last night. You're never finished, she said, voice soft but merciless. You'll go in as a disgruntled lawyer. Easy enough to believe. You'll ask to buy back the evidence he's been hoarding. He'll want to gloat, so he'll show you what he's got. And then, Rhea bent to the duffel bag, unzipped it the rest of the way. Inside lay a pistol, clean, oiled, indifferent. She placed it on the table between them like an accusation. "And then you do what you have to do," she said. Miles felt his mouth go dry. "I didn't sign up for this." "You signed when you took the money. When you buried the truth. This is the cost." She leaned closer, her perfume mingling with the acrid tang of the cigarette. "Don't pretend you didn't know." He braced his hands on the table, head bowed. He could feel the fight in him curdling into something sour. "And if I say no?" Ria's smile was a small, sad thing. "Then Felix will keep coming and you'll be next. And so will your father. So will the people you love. What's left of them." Her words slipped under his ribs like a blade. He looked at the gun, the black hole of its barrel staring back. He wondered how a single piece of metal could weigh so much. Ria's hand brushed his. For a heartbeat, it almost felt like the old days, when they'd conspired together in quiet corners, when he believed she might be his redemption. But her eyes were colder now. "You can do this, Miles. You're not as weak as you think." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe there was still something in him worth saving. But as he wrapped trembling fingers around the gun, he knew that whatever line he'd crossed last night was nothing compared to the one waiting for him now. He stood, the weight in his pocket foreign and familiar all at once. Ria watched him go, her silhouette sharp against the city's neon wounds. At the door, he paused, hand on the knob. "What happens when this is over?" Her answer was a whisper he almost didn't catch. "It's never over." Miles stepped into the night, rain swallowing him whole. Somewhere ahead, Felix Ortega waited behind a locked door, oblivious that his own end had just arrived in the shape of a man who'd once sworn he'd never be a monster. And somewhere deep inside, something in Miles was ready to meet him there. The rain had eased to a fine drizzle by the time Miles reached the old club on Harland. The building sagged between two shuttered storefronts like a drunk between bouncers. Its neon sign, *** Orchid Room, ***, buzzed and sputtered, casting sickly pink light over the cracked sidewalk. Miles stood across the street, collar turned up, hand buried in his pocket where the gun dug into his thigh. He'd walked past this place 100 times when it was just another ruin in a dying neighborhood. Tonight it was a door he could never close behind him. Inside, the music was low and sour, a scratchy jazz track looping through battered speakers. A bored bartender gave him a once-over, but didn't bother to speak. The main floor was almost empty, a few old men nursing cheap whiskey, a girl with a smear of lipstick on her teeth asleep in a booth. No one looked up when Miles crossed to the back stairs. Halfway up, he paused, pressing his palm flat against the wall to steady himself. His heartbeat wasn't panic anymore. It was something worse. Resolve. He thought of Ria's voice. **, you're not as weak as you think. **, he wondered if she really believed that, or if she'd just needed to believe it enough for both of them. At the landing, a hulking man with a shaved head and a neck like a tree trunk blocked his path. "Appointment?" the man asked, though the tone suggested it didn't matter either way. Miles cleared his throat. "Tell Felix Ortega that Miles Donovan wants to buy his forgiveness." The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He knocked on the door behind him, 2 sharp raps. It swung inward, warm light spilling into the hallway, and Miles stepped through. Felix Ortega was younger than Miles expected. Barely 30, maybe, with a face that looked like it had never known hunger. He wore a silk shirt open at the throat, gold chain glinting against olive skin. He sat behind a battered desk covered in old ledgers, a half-empty glass of bourbon at his elbow. When he saw Miles, he laughed, a bright, grating sound that bounced off the peeling wallpaper. "Well, look at this. The good lawyer come crawling." Felix gestured to the empty chair opposite.
"Sit.
Let's hear your confession." Miles sat. His fingers itched to wrap around the gun, but he forced them to stay still. He'd thought he could bluff his way through this, just show the weapon, scare Felix enough to make him back down. But now, with the other man so close, so smug, Miles realized the lie he'd told himself. He wasn't here to scare anyone. He was here to finish what he'd started. "You've got files that don't belong to you," Miles said. His voice came out calm, almost casual. I want them. Felix leaned back, swirling his drink. What makes you think I'd give them up? Because if you don't, Miles said, people a lot worse than me are going to come knocking. You're pushing in on ground that's already owned. Felix's grin widened. Rhea sent you, didn't she? Sweet Rhea. She doesn't have the guts to do this herself, so she sends her lapdog. The word dug under Miles's skin. He let it sit there, a splinter that made his next words easier to spit out. I'm no one's dog. Felix slammed his glass down, splashing bourbon across the papers. You're nothing without her. She makes you think you're dangerous, but you're just another suit. Another idiot who thought he could play our game. Miles's eyes flicked to the briefcase at Felix's feet, metal corners scuffed from a dozen handoffs. The evidence. Everything Rhea needed to stay clean. Everything Miles needed to buy back whatever scraps of his soul he could still find. You don't want this fight, Felix, Miles said. He almost believed it himself. Felix stood, slow, deliberate. He stepped around the desk until he was close enough that Miles could smell the expensive cologne, the sharp tang of bourbon on his breath. You're going to stand up, Felix said, voice low. You're going to walk out that door. And when you do, you'll remember that the only reason you're breathing is because I let you. Miles felt the moment crack open inside him like a rotted beam giving way. He thought of his father in that hospital bed, wires snaking into bruised flesh. He thought of Rhea, her eyes hard and bright, telling him he wasn't weak. He thought of himself, sitting in that conference room, signing away every part of him that had ever been good.
He stood.
But he didn't turn to leave. He reached into his pocket and brought the gun up between them. Felix's laugh caught in his throat. He stepped back, hands lifted like a man performing for a firing squad. Easy, counselor. You don't want to do this. Yes, Miles said, voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it himself. I do. The room smelled of sweat and old bourbon. Felix took a step forward, maybe to lunge, maybe to beg. Miles would never know. He squeezed the trigger once, twice. The shots were deafening in the tiny room, bouncing off the walls in a way that made Miles's skull vibrate. Felix crumpled where he stood, the briefcase toppling over, papers spilling out like entrails. Miles stared at the mess, at the bright red ruins soaking into the cheap carpet. His hands were steady now. Empty. Outside the club, the city pulsed with sirens and distant thunder. Miles stepped into the street, the drizzle clinging to his hair, his lashes, washing the blood from his sleeves in thin pink rivulets. He didn't run. He didn't even look back at the flickering sign above the door. He thought about Rhea, whether she'd smile when she heard, whether she'd call him strong or just useful. He wondered what he was now. Not clean. Not free. But not the man who'd walked into that room either. He kept moving, boots splashing through puddles, the gun cold and silent in his pocket. Somewhere ahead, the city waited to swallow him whole again. But for the first time in months, he felt like he was walking forward instead of being dragged. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he wouldn't stop until he got there. Miles sat in the back booth of a 24-hour diner that smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. The vinyl seat stuck to his damp shirt as he hunched over a chipped mug, steam rising in pale curls that did nothing to warm his hands. Outside, the city carried on oblivious, sirens echoing through narrow streets, neon signs buzzing like insects drawn to their own death. He'd wiped the blood from his sleeves in the bathroom sink, but he could still feel it clinging to his skin. Every so often, his fingers twitched as if they expected the weight of the gun to still be there. It wasn't. He'd left it in a storm drain 3 blocks from the Orchid room, tossed it like a rotten tooth he no longer had the stomach to keep. Across from him sat a man who called himself Finch, though Miles doubted that was the name on his birth certificate. Finch wore a threadbare peacoat and a crooked smile that made it impossible to tell if he was amused or disgusted. He drummed his fingers on the table, watching Miles with the idle interest of someone examining a dog that might bite. Word travels fast, Finch said, voice low and mild. You know that, right? Miles said nothing. He traced the rim of the mug with his thumb, eyes fixed on the swirl of cheap coffee. Felix Ortega was connected. People are going to come asking questions. Finch leaned in, breath tinged with stale tobacco. You got answers for them? Miles finally looked up. His voice felt like sandpaper scraping his throat. I didn't do it for them. Finch's grin widened.
No.
You did it for her. The diner's overhead lights hummed. A waitress shuffled by, tired eyes flicking to the two men, then away. She didn't care enough to listen.
No one here did.
Miles wanted to tell Finch he was wrong, that this hadn't been for Rhea, or the firm, or anyone but himself. But the words stuck. He wasn't sure what he believed anymore. He'd crossed the line so completely that the idea of blame felt laughable. Finch slid a manila envelope across the table. You've got one play left, Donovan. Before Rhea decides you're more trouble than you're worth. Miles hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside were photos. Felix at the club, Felix shaking hands with men Miles didn't recognize, Felix slipping envelopes into the trunk of a black sedan. Dates and times scrawled in the margins like a ledger of sins. What is this? Miles asked. Insurance, Finch said. He tore open a sugar packet, letting the granules spill across the table. Felix had leverage on Rhea. He was going to use it to push her out, maybe worse. You took care of him, but that leverage didn't disappear. It just got orphaned. Miles flipped through the photos, his pulse quickening. Each image was another nail in the coffin of his old life. You want me to take this to her? Finch snorted. She already knows. But she'll test you. She'll want to see if you're smart enough to hold something back. Something she can't use against you later. The pieces shifted in Miles's mind, slow, grinding, like old gears waking up. He realized too late that the killing hadn't been the end. It was just another beginning. Another debt he'd carry until someone decided to cash him out. He pushed the envelope away. What do you get out of this? Finch shrugged. I like seeing the game played right. And maybe one day, when the dust settles, you'll owe me something. Who knows? Miles sat back, exhausted. The idea of another favor, another chain around his neck, made his stomach twist. But what choice did he have? He was in this now, neck deep. Finch checked his watch, stood, and buttoned his coat. Take my advice, counselor. Don't trust her too much. And don't trust yourself either. You're not done bleeding for this. He left a crumpled bill on the table and vanished into the night, the bell over the diner door jingling like a cruel joke. Miles stared after him, the envelope heavy in his hands. An hour later, he was standing outside Rhea's apartment. The building was a pale slab of old brick, windows lit by the dull glow of lamps that never switched off. He wondered if she was already waiting for him, perched on her sofa with that same icy smile, rehearsing the words that would shape his next move. He buzzed her door. A pause, then the latch clicked open. He climbed the stairs, each step an accusation echoing in his bones. Inside, her place was warm, quiet, books stacked in crooked piles, a single glass of wine on the table, untouched. Rhea stood by the window, arms folded, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Is it done? She asked. Miles dropped the envelope onto the coffee table. He's dead. She didn't flinch. Her eyes flicked to the photos spilling out. And this? Insurance, he said, mimicking Finch's tone. For both of us. Something like approval flickered in her gaze. She walked to him, close enough that he could smell the faint trace of soap and the city clinging to her coat. She reached up, fingers brushing his jaw, almost tender. You're learning, she murmured. Good. He wanted to pull away from her touch, but he didn't. He hated that part of him still wanted her to say his name like it meant something more than leverage. I did what you asked, Miles said. Now what? Rhea's smile was a blade sheathed in velvet. Now you stay close. We're not finished. He searched her eyes for the truth, for any sign that the woman who once whispered his name in the dark was still in there. But all he saw was the glint of survival. The promise that when the next storm came, she'd let him drown first if it meant she could stay afloat. Miles stepped back, pulse steady. If you burn me, Rhea, I'll take you with me. Her laugh was soft, almost sweet. I know. Outside, dawn was beginning to bruise the horizon. Miles left her apartment with the envelope under his arm and the taste of old coffee and broken promises in his mouth. He didn't know where the next line would be, only that he'd cross it when he got there. And when he did, maybe, just maybe, he'd decide who got to bleed for it.